Hello and welcome to RachAquarelle. This is day 2 of this series that I'm working on, which will be themed holiday and winter and of course watercolor, ink. Although today I'm not using any ink, it's just going to be watercolor and lots of masking fluid. And this is a really good project to do, I think, on the weekend when you can take lots of breaks and do other things, because we'll be using several different iterations of masking fluid to make this painting come together. And so it's going to be really important that you allow things time to dry in between iterations. And as always with this series that I'm doing right now, all the templates are going to be available for free. There is a link in the description that you can go to, and then you're able to print out the template if you want to, and then you can transfer it onto your own watercolor paper. Now this template is pretty simple. I just wanted to make sure everything was very symmetrical, and I used like a handwritten font from my computer and just printed that out and then drew this triangle on. Now you might guess that this is going to be a tree. And what I want is to have a lot of really nice texture in this piece. I'm kind of thinking of this as sort of wall art, so not really a card or anything like that, but some nice festive wall art. And it turned out pretty good, I have to say, even though this was really experimental on my part. So I used carbon paper to transfer this template onto my watercolor paper, and I'm going to start out with some masking fluid. And for parts of this, I will speed it up. Those will be mainly the parts that are very repetitive and long. I'm going to be using this applicator to apply most of my masking fluid, at least for this first part of the painting. And you can just use this knob here to adjust how wide you want your masking fluid to be applied. And I don't want mine to be super wide, so it will be a little bit narrow because I'm going to use this to go over all the lettering at the bottom of the painting. And this tool can be a little tricky to use, and actually I shouldn't have poured it into my container just yet, because using this tool, it's easier just to dip it so that you get some really good depth, because this tool holds the masking fluid in between those two prongs, and then as you press it to the paper, it releases the masking fluid. And so I have to re-dip it quite often because it goes pretty fast. And what I'm doing now is I'm adding just a dot into the center of all these circles. So these are going to be lights, and I want them to have that appearance of actually being bright. And so I'm just putting a very small dot in the center of each one of those. I'm not filling up those entire dots. And now I'm going to use the masking fluid to go over the letters. And when I was doing my transfer with my transfer paper, which is also known as carbon paper, I made sure to use very light pressure because I knew that I wanted these letters to be white in the end. So there might be a little bit of the carbon mark showing through, which basically just looks like a pencil mark. And as long as you keep it pretty light, it's really not going to be noticeable at all. And I'm not worried about any kind of calligraphy here, so I'm not trying to get different widths for the lettering or anything like that. I'm keeping it very basic, very simple. Overall, this is going to definitely look like a handmade piece. I don't want it to look like it was printed off of a computer. And I think that's really fun to use a font that I print from the computer, but then I execute it in a way where it doesn't look so artificial and computer made. It still looks handmade. And I'm not a letterer, so I don't feel guilty at all about printing off fonts and just kind of using those. Okay, so now for the fun part. I want to do some spattering, so I cut out a triangle the same size and shape as my tree, and I'm going to use that just to mask off that section, because I'm going to use a toothbrush here to spatter masking fluid all over the background because I want the effect of snow falling. and I just don't want the spattering to get onto the tree. So that's a very simple solution to block off an area where you want to guard it from spatter and still have that nice random spatter everywhere else. And the fun thing about spatter is that it dries relatively quickly. Now you might be able to see on my paper that there's some areas that got big blobs of masking fluid. And I know that I probably say this in all of my videos, but I never know who's seen my other videos or not, so I'm gonna just say it all the time. If you get masking fluid on your paper in places where you didn't want it, you need to let it dry completely before you try to remove it. And I know that you didn't see the transition here, but I did walk away from this and let everything dry completely. You can also use a hair dryer, which I'll do a few times during this painting process to make the masking fluid dry a little bit faster. But if there's some areas that you didn't want masking fluid, just wait for it to dry and then peel it off. And I'm gonna leave some of those large blobs in the end, and some of them I will remove. But even though they look pretty dry at this point, I'm still just gonna give them a little bit of time, and I'm using my Purell Red here to go over all these ornaments. Now remember, I put just a little dot of masking fluid in the center of these ornaments or lights, whatever you want to call them. So I am painting over these completely with the red Purell Red. And when I remove the masking fluid in the center of these lights or ornaments, you'll get a little white dot in the center that will be maintained because of that little bit of masking fluid. And I'm letting this red paint even go outside the borders where I drew these circles, and I'm not worried about these being perfect circles or anything like that. And I'll explain why in just a little bit. But you don't need to stay in the lines at all. In fact, I encourage you to go outside the lines when you're doing this stage of the process. And I'm going really nice and bright and bold with this too. And essentially what we're going to be doing is after I have these all painted, I'm going to apply more masking fluid on top of these. And the masking fluid will stay within the drawn circles. So there will be just a little bit of red on the outside of the circles that is not masked off. And now what I'm doing is I'm going in with a wet brush. I'm cleaning off all the pigment that I'm picking up, but I'm just trying to soften the center a little bit. Because ultimately what I want to be able to do is just add maybe a touch of yellow toward the center of these lights or ornaments to add to that effect of it being luminescent. So with my wet brush, I'm kind of dabbing a little bit more water on there, and then I'm using my paper towel to pick up just a little bit of that pigment and soften up these lights just a little bit. And I don't think that this is completely necessary. It's just kind of the effect that I wanted to get. It did take a little bit of time to go through all these. And it's really important too, if you are ever wanting to lift up pigment that's already on your paper, just don't scrub too hard with your brush because you'll start to damage the fibers of the paper. And there's only going to be so much that you can do. In almost no circumstance would you be able to pick up all the pigment that you put down. So basically all I'm trying to do is just kind of soften up the center. And I think that at this point you can kind of see how effective that's being. And as long as you do it soon after you put the paint down, it's a little bit easier too. So as long as things are not completely bone dry, you should be able to pick up pigment. It'll also vary by the pigment that you're using. This red pigment is fairly strong, so it's actually a little bit, I think, harder to pick up than some other pigments. But that's okay. I think that we're getting the effect that we want. And you can see that even my bristles of my brush are picking up pigment, and I'm having to wipe that off onto my paper towel, because otherwise I'm just going to be kind of stirring around the pigment on the paper. It's really important to actually lift it off of the paper with your paper towel, and to also clean off your bristles to make sure that they're pretty clean. I'm almost done softening up these lights here. The color palette for this project is going to be pretty simple. So I've already used my Purell Red. I will also be using my Hansa Yellow and my Payne's Gray. This has kind of been a running theme for me lately, this very simple palette. But in this one, I'm actually going to be adding another color as well, which is going to be Phthalo Blue. So I will be showing you that in just a little bit. And I'm not sure that you saw, but I did apply just a little bit of masking fluid to the center of the star at the top of the tree. And then I just covered that with yellow. I went way outside the lines, which is totally perfectly fine. And in fact, I encourage you to do that. It's kind of nice to have a situation where you don't need to be careful. Just throw that paint on there because we want a nice glowing effect. And that's what we're going to get. Now I'm just adding a little bit of yellow into the center of these lights. And it's not going to make a big impact right now. We'll do a little bit more actually at the very end of the painting to really make these lights look like they're glowing. And the trick to making anything appear as though it's glowing or that it has its own source of light coming from it is that you have to contrast it with dark. So this is actually overall going to be a very dark painting. And what I want to do is just really emphasize the lights and also give a really cool, almost glowing effect to this Christmas tree. All right, so now I'm relatively confident that these big globs of masking fluid are dry. So I'm just gonna go through. I don't need to remove all of them. Some of them are fine because they'll give us just a little bit of variation. We have a lot of really tiny spatters all over the place, but then, you know, it doesn't hurt anything to have some larger snowflakes. Maybe they're a little bit closer up. And now I'm just making sure that the lights are completely dry because I need to mask those off. And I'm removing that little center that I had placed in all of those circles. And you don't have to do that. But I do recommend it just so you're not putting masking fluid on top of masking fluid. So now you can see I'm putting masking fluid on top of all of these lights, which are completely dry at this point. And I'm leaving some of that red outside of the masked area. So I'm keeping the masking fluid within the lines that I drew for the most part. It doesn't have to be exact or anything like that. I almost forgot one. But yeah, we're just going to let that dry. And I know now you can't see the masking fluid because when it dries, it becomes a little bit more transparent, but it is still there. I just let that dry completely. Now I'm getting my Phthalo Blue, and I'm basically going to apply a wash over this entire sheet of paper. And by the way, this paper is a 9x12, but the way that I masked it off with my tape, I kind of made it closer to an 8x10 size. So I'm just going to go all over. I'm going to use a lot of water. I want to keep this fairly light, which with Phthalo Blue can be a little bit tricky because Phthalo Blue is a very strong pigment. So it's easy to pick up a lot of Phthalo Blue, but as long as you have a lot of water, which is allowing you to, you know, create this wash, then you shouldn't have a problem with it being too dark too fast. But I definitely want everything to stay really, really wet because I'm going to drop in some of the Hansa Yellow into the tree to create some green. And I also want this at this stage to be very mottled and uneven, so I'm not going for like an even wash at all. And I'm gonna, you know, there's even gonna be some areas that I miss and they stay white, and that's totally fine. This is kind of a preliminary stage and we're just setting things up for this painting. So I'm adding in some Hansa yellow into that phthalo blue. And this is where I'm going to start just dropping it into where the tree is. So everything in the background is going to remain blue. And then I'll just add a lot of yellow onto the tree. And again, I want things to be uneven, mottled, and to have a lot of texture because that's going to be really important for this painting. So I'm dropping in just a little bit more pigment in a couple of areas. The only goal here again is just to keep things very uneven in color, to have a lot of variation. And even though the template for this painting is a geometric triangle, the finished piece isn't going to look that uniform. It's actually going to look quite organic. It was just very simple, I think, to start with that simple template. And ultimately, it's just to kind of guide where I place paint. It's not going to end up being a triangular, straight-edged tree by any means. And I didn't want to go overboard with the yellow because, as I said before, this is overall going to be a very dark painting as though it's at nighttime. So I don't want a lot of bright yellows within the actual tree itself. And plus there's going to be some yellow in the star and then in the lights. So I don't want any bright yellows in the tree to distract from those light sources. All right, so I've let everything dry right now. And you can even see that my masking fluid that I had in this dish, it dried. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. And it's very, very important to let everything completely dry. Anytime that you are going in to add more masking fluid, you want your watercolors that you've applied to be bone dry. The reason that that's so important is that if you have any little bit of moisture on your paper fibers are soft, and so they're susceptible to just absorbing materials rather than having this masking fluid merely sit on top of the paper, which is what we want. So very, very important to make sure that before you apply masking fluid on top of watercolor, that you have allowed that watercolor and any wash that you've applied to dry absolutely 100%. I always just say bone dry, and use a hair dryer if you need to, or just get up and work on some other things, distract yourself. And so now I'm using a silicone applicator. And if you're curious about these tools, I do have them in the list of art supplies that I always link in the descriptions of my videos. These are actually, I think, technically used for sculpting clay. But for me, I like to use them when I want to apply masking fluid in a way that's a little bit more organic. So the other applicator creates really nice even lines, and these are a little bit less even. These applicators come in different shapes and sizes, so you can get different effects with them. And I never use masking fluid with any brushes. I don't even have any cheap craft paintbrushes at all. But I probably wouldn't even use the masking fluid with those because it would annoy me too much to always have to be buying more of those when the bristles get completely ruined and unusable. But never ever use masking fluid on your good brushes, because even if you think you're going to go wash those bristles right away, it's not going to be good enough. This masking fluid stuff will just wreak havoc on your brushes. So there's lots of ways to apply masking fluid that I'm discovering, and I love sharing those kinds of tips. I've definitely ruined way too many brushes. The way that I'm applying the masking fluid right now, you can see there's just a slight curvation to these lines that just sort of follow the general way that maybe a tree would look. So like the texture of the tree, the pines, the needles, the branches. And I know that there's lots of different ways that evergreen trees or Christmas trees can look. So this is just kind of what I decided to go with. I kind of toyed with a few different ways of executing the texture of this tree, and I thought this was going to be the simplest and most effective. And what we're really going for here is texture and not, you know, rendering or anything like that. So I'm just having these lines curve toward the outer edge of the tree. I'm trying to place them fairly close together without having them touch one another, because I do want to be able to mask off enough that I'm maintaining a lot of these colors underneath. But I don't want any just big blobs or anything like that. So I'm trying to keep my lines fairly narrow, close together, but not quite touching. And trying to fill in as much space as I can without having these lines touch one another. And I still have masking fluid on top of the lights and the star at the top of the tree. And also, you know, all the spattering that I had done is still there. The letters are still masked out. I haven't removed any masking fluid except for when I removed those small dots within the lights. And then I just applied more masking fluid on top of those lights. And now for the trunk of the tree, I'm kind of just drawing in some of the texture, like wood texture. But I am going to leave that pretty abstract. It's not going to be any, you know, focal point in this painting, but I do want just a little hint of that trunk in there. And now I'm tilting my paper because masking fluid is a little bit shiny when it's dry. So that enables me to better see areas that could use a little bit more masking fluid. So I'm making much smaller marks at this point, just trying to fill in space where I can. Again, without having all these lines merge together or touch one another. So there's some areas where, you know, all I can put is a very short stroke. But again, I want to maintain quite a bit of this color that I'm masking off without having everything kind of butt up against each other. That was an awkward way of saying I don't want these lines to touch one another. And again, once this part is done, I need to wait and make sure that all this masking fluid is completely dry before I apply any more watercolor. And once I have all this texture in for the tree, I'm going to be using that cutout triangle again, so don't throw that away. I'm going to mask off my tree again, and I'm going to do one more spatter. That way I have some spatter that I did on the white paper before I started painting, so it's going to maintain some white spatter, and then I'll spatter on top of this blue, so then I'll also have some blue spatter showing through, and that will just give this a little bit more detention, or what's the word I'm trying to think of? Dimension, not detention. Sorry, I have a teenager, so I have detention on my mind, I guess. So yeah, I'm just spattering this again. I'm going to get a couple more big blobs that I'll just let dry, and then I'll see if I want to remove them once they're dry. And I'm just trying to use up all of my masking fluid. I don't think that you can really go overboard with spatter, because if you ever feel like you have too much, all you have to do is apply a nice light wash over some areas that you feel like there's too much spatter, and they'll just kind of blend in a little bit. So I think with spatter, that's one of the few situations where I think, you know, usually I say less is more, but not necessarily the case when you're spattering masking fluid, because it's easy to kind of diminish that look, but impossible to get it back if you don't go far enough. All right, so I'm letting it dry again, and now I'm back. Everything's completely dry. And now is the fun part. I've got some nice clean water. And so far I haven't used my Payne's Gray, but this is where I'm going to go in really heavy and dark and very pigmented with the Payne's Gray. I even added more to my palette because I didn't want to run out in the middle of this. It's very important to do this all at the same time. So I am going over everything with this Payne's Gray, and I really wish I had a bigger brush right now. I have my Hake brushes, but I don't know, I get frustrated with them. They don't quite do what I wish that they did. Yep, so I'm going over everything with my Payne's Gray. I want it really dark. I am using quite a bit of water, but really I'm keeping the pigment very saturated. And I'm even going over the tree with the Payne's Gray because that is what is going to make the texture of the tree really come through. And I decided, I thought about leaving the bottom just blue as though it's like nice light snow. And at night, snow kind of looks blue. But ultimately, I decided to go over the whole thing with Payne's Gray. I tried to keep it just a little bit lighter, so a little bit less saturated toward the bottom. But I wanted my Merry Christmas to really show up, so I figured I may as well go over that area with some Payne's Gray at least. And I think you can already see the effect that this is creating, where we have that really cool texture with the tree and that nice texture with the spattering, kind of like there's snow falling. And I think I'm done right now, but I'm not really. I'm just kind of looking things over, drying things off. And again, I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that everything is extremely dry. And that same thing goes for when you want to finally remove your masking fluid. Your paper must be bone dry, because if your paper is damp and soft and you go to start rubbing off the masking fluid, you're gonna rip your paper. And I've slowed down this part, but I spent a lot of time removing all this masking fluid, so I will speed it up a little bit later. But what I want you to notice is that when I start to pull up the masking fluid, I use my finger to gently rub up a corner that I can grab onto, and then I pull it off wherever I can. I can't do that with all the spatter, of course, so I'm gonna just very, very gently rub with my hand to remove all the spatter. But anywhere that there is masking fluid that is, in lines or on letters, it's pretty easy just to grab a little corner of it and then pull it off, and then you have a much reduced risk of actually damaging your paper. And I've certainly done that before, where I was removing masking fluid and I was rubbing maybe a little bit too aggressively, or maybe my paper was just a little tiny bit damp to the point that it's almost not even perceivable. So, learn from my mistakes and just make sure that you're working with a very, very dry surface. All right, so now I'm speeding this up, and you can just kind of see how I am approaching this. The masking fluid is very tactile, so you're mostly going to be determining where you need to do more removal, especially with the spattering, just by touch. So you want to get your paper to a point where it's smooth again. It just feels like paper, and it doesn't have that texture on it. And you can see that this masking fluid blocked off the lights very, very well, even though I went over those with really dark Payne's Gray. My dogs are snoring. They're bored from me painting all day, I guess. And right now it's off screen because I'm kind of just sweeping everything off onto my floor, because future Rachel will vacuum that up. Today, Rachel is creative and playing and not caring about making messes. All right, so I've got all the masking fluid off, and you can see how well it did on all the areas where I applied it. And people often ask me what kind of masking fluid I use. Right now I'm using Winsor & Newton masking fluid, and I really like it. I haven't really had any experience with a masking fluid that I didn't like, but I think I've been using Winsor & Newton for a pretty long time. Now, some of those blobs were really close to the tree, like those blobs of masking fluid that I initially dropped down, and I figured those would just be snow, but they were like so close to the tree that I was like, they have to just become lights now. So I painted those red and left the centers white. And now I'm just using a little bit more red just to brighten up some of the other lights. So I'm not completely going over them, just adding a few touches here and there of nice bright red. because when you remove masking fluid off of a surface that's already been painted, you will just inevitably pick up and lift up some of the pigment. So I felt like these could just use a little bit of brightening up. You can see that they really have a nice effect of glowing, especially in contrast with all the dark surroundings. And the texture of the tree, you can see why I wanted to leave it very mottled and uneven when I was applying the yellow and the phthalo blue, because that just gives such a nice effect. Now I'm just brightening up the star with a little bit more yellow and dropping in just a little bit of yellow close to the center of these lights, just leaving the very smallest little bit of these lights white. So I'm not covering up the entire center with the yellow. And we're just about done with this project. This was actually a really fun one. Every time I sit down and try to think of a project to do, in my head it just seems like so simple and like it's gonna go so fast. This one I would say is simple. It's just a matter of having enough patience and having enough things to do to kind of distract yourself while you're waiting for things to dry. And today was a good day for that for me because I had lots of laundry to do. I did some cleaning, had a little bit more family stuff to do. So it worked out well. And if you look close to where I put the trunk of the tree, you can see that, you know, it's there, but it's not a big attention grabber. I didn't want to, you know, paint it brown or something like that. I just wanted it to kind of be there and have a little bit of texture, but not really be a big deal. So I like how that turned out. And I really like how the Merry Christmas is really the only part of this painting that's super, super white. So it really stands out. And as always, I'm cleaning off my palette. It just makes me feel good to come back to a nice clean workspace the next time I want to paint. So here comes the best part, removing the masking tape. And then it's all of a sudden a magically complete painting. I had to use a lot of tape to hold this down just because of the amount of water that I had to apply. It was kind of like lifting itself up. And here I'm deciding that there's that big blob of white right by the border. And I decided I didn't like that, so I'm putting the tape back down. I'm getting back into my paint, and I am going to just apply a little bit of Payne's Gray on top of that. It's going to be very light. It's not a big deal. I just, you know, things like that can just drive me crazy. So it's not going to take much. I don't have to go over it super dark or anything like that. And then I'm going to use my paper towel just to kind of pick it up a little bit so that I don't have any kind of hard edge on the painting, since that paint obviously isn't going to dry at the same time as all the other paints I applied. So there we go, problem solved. All right, here it is. And I'll show you a bit of a close-up of this, but I really like how it turned out. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I hope that you'll give this a try. Again, the template is free in the link that I'll put in the description of this video. I would love to know what you guys think. So leave me your comments and let me know what you might want to see over the next couple of days. I'll be doing a project like this every single day, sometimes a little bit simpler, however. And I hope that you guys had a really great day today. Bye.